August 12, 1942. Tulagi Harbor, Solomon Islands, Motor Torpedo Boat Base. At the radio station, the operator carefully logged a high-priority dispatch originating from Henderson Field. The message reported a Japanese destroyer formation moving southeast along the Central Solomon's narrow channel, with multiple warships projected to reach Iron Bottom Sound at 0200 hours. Lieutenant Hugh Robinson, among the earliest PT boat commanders deployed to the Solomon Islands, scrutinized the intelligence. 4 small torpedo boats were now tasked with confronting an indeterminate number of Japanese destroyers, vessels that had maintained dominance over these waters since the outbreak of hostilities. What neither the Americans nor their commanders yet realized was that these modest 77-foot wooden craft were about to initiate a sustained program of nighttime disruption, compelling the Imperial Japanese Navy to revise fundamentally its logistical operations across the Solomon Islands. For months, Japanese forces had controlled the waters around Guadalcanal under the cover of darkness. Following the American landings in early August 1942, Japanese destroyers had been running reinforcements and supplies down the Slot, a narrow maritime corridor through the Central Solomons, often without significant opposition. U.S. intelligence dubbed these rapid nighttime supply missions the Tokyo Express. They had become a critical lifeline, keeping tens of thousands of Japanese troops on Guadalcanal operational and well-provisioned. Japanese naval proficiency in nocturnal combat had been vividly demonstrated at the Battle of Savo Island earlier that August. In just over half an hour, Japanese cruisers sank 4 Allied heavy cruisers, a catastrophe attributed to the long-range accuracy of Type 93 long-lance torpedoes and crews extensively trained for night engagements. Japanese lookouts, aided by superior optics, could detect enemy vessels in near-total darkness, a realm where American radar often proved inadequate. Admiral Teruzuki Yamamoto's tactical doctrine was clear: maintain nocturnal supremacy to secure the supply lines and preserve the garrison on Guadalcanal. While U.S. aircraft controlled the skies during daylight from Henderson Field, nocturnal operations remained under Japanese authority. Without these nocturnal logistics missions, the roughly 30,000 Japanese troops on the island would have faced starvation within weeks. The PT boat represented a different approach, an expression of American industrial ingenuity pushed to operational extremes. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2 reached Tulagi in August 1942 with the first PT boats. Each 77-foot Elco craft weighed only 45 tons and had a draft of just 5 feet, allowing it to navigate shallow channels inaccessible to larger destroyers. Lieutenant Roland West Holm, assigned to one of the initial boats, inspected its offensive capabilities as twilight descended. Armament included 2 twin 50-caliber machine gun mounts and 4 21-inch torpedo tubes loaded with Mark 8 torpedoes, an effective weapon in theory, but plagued by a high failure rate due to faulty magnetic detonators and depth control issues. Initially, the boats were entirely dependent on human senses for detecting targets, as they carried no radar systems. Their greatest asset, however, was speed. 3 Packard 4M2512 engines, producing a combined 4,050 horsepower, enabled rapid maneuvers and surprise strikes, a crucial advantage against larger, more heavily armed destroyers. The stage was set for a radical shift in the naval balance around Guadalcanal. Small, fast, and lightly armed, these PT boats would soon prove that innovative tactics and agility could challenge even the most dominant naval power in the Pacific, redefining the night battle in the Solomon Islands. The vessels could reach a top speed of 41 knots under calm conditions, although operational realities during combat usually limited them to around 35 knots. Japanese destroyers rarely exceeded this speed. In the narrow, treacherous waters surrounding the Guadalcanal region, the ability to accelerate rapidly was often the difference between survival and disaster. The hulls were constructed using unconventional techniques. 2 layers of mahogany planking created a resilient shell capable of absorbing shocks that would typically crack steel. Remarkably, a single boat could be assembled in just 2 months at a cost of $263,000, whereas a standard destroyer demanded 18 months and upwards of $8 million. Eldon Genta, a motor machinist made first class, had dedicated 8 months to memorizing the unique acoustic signatures of the Packard engines. Hailing from Detroit, he had previously worked on Packard production lines before enlisting. His experience allowed him to detect mechanical issues by ear alone, even in complete darkness. Genta frequently reminded his crew that these engines required delicate handling. An improper fuel mixture could cost 200 horsepower, and overheating might result in a catastrophic rod failure. Yet, when properly managed, the engines provided the high-speed performance essential in combat situations. Genta adapted the carburetor settings specifically for the humid climate of the Solomon Islands and developed a meticulous pre-mission routine. This checklist included bringing engines to precise operating temperatures, fine-tuning ignition timing for optimal acceleration, and confirming the cooling systems could sustain prolonged high-speed operation. Thanks to these modifications, the boats often continued functioning well beyond the limits suggested by manufacturer guidelines.
Meanwhile, Commander Koshi Kaneda was navigating a Fubuki-class destroyer at 28 knots, leading a small squadron of 3 ships through the constricted channel known as the Slot. With 2 decades of Imperial Navy experience, he was highly attuned to the dangers lurking in these waters. Subtle shadows could conceal enemy vessels, and faint phosphorescent trails often betrayed the path of incoming torpedoes. On this particular mission, the objective was to deliver 800 drums of supplies to the garrison stationed at Cape Esperon. These containers were to be pushed overboard near the shoreline, where troops would swim out to retrieve them. Though inefficient, historically only about 30% of the cargo reached the troops, the method minimized exposure to dawn air attacks. Despite their firepower and speed, destroyers had significant limitations. At 388 feet in length, they required roughly 800 yards to complete a full turn at operational speed, and with a 12-foot draft, they were confined to deeper channels. Their 5-inch guns had a minimum depression angle, leaving targets closer than 300 yards out of reach. Against smaller, agile adversaries in close quarters, the advantages of size and armament were largely neutralized, making maneuverability and situational awareness critical for survival. On the night of October 13, 1942, at approximately 11:30 p.m., 4 PT boats from Squadron 2 lay in near-total darkness near Savo Island, engines running at a low idle to minimize both sound and the faint luminescent trail left in the water. Radio silence was strictly maintained. Crew members relied solely on hand signals and shielded blinker lights to coordinate. Lieutenant Lester Gamble, commanding PT-48, positioned his vessel at the head of the patrol formation. The boats maintained roughly 500-yard spacing, scanning the dim horizon and listening intently. Without radar, sailors depended on what they called the Mark I eyeball, human sight honed by hours of exposure to darkness. At 11:47 p.m., a lookout reported distant silhouettes moving along the horizon. 3 Japanese destroyers advancing in column at roughly 25 knots toward Cape Esperon. Standard PT boat attack doctrine recommended approaching from multiple directions to divide enemy defensive fire. However, with only 4 boats available and torpedoes known for occasional malfunctions, Gamble elected to concentrate the assault. His plan was for all 4 boats to target the starboard quarter of the trailing destroyer, launch torpedoes from approximately 500 yards, and then retreat at top speed. PT-48 led the formation, engines throttled to around 1,500 RPM as it closed to within 1,000 yards of the target. At a distance of 500 yards, he launched 2 Mark 8 torpedoes, each aimed 30 degrees ahead of the vessel's current path to intercept the target.
The torpedo's trails of rising bubbles instantly drew the attention of the Japanese crew. Alarms rang out, "Good eye, torpedoes!" The destroyer's helmsman executed a sharp starboard maneuver, narrowly avoiding both torpedoes, which passed astern by less than 20 yards. Star shells exploded overhead, bathing the PT boats in blinding white light. Japanese 5-inch guns opened up, sending towering columns of water around PT-48. Gamble responded by zigzagging violently, pushing his engines to the limit in an evasive sprint. The engagement was brief but intense, demonstrating both the daring tactics of PT crews and the constant hazards of nighttime naval operations without modern detection systems. PT-46 initiated the next offensive, closing the distance to approximately 400 yards before launching its torpedoes. The first torpedo veered off course and failed to hit its target, while the second torpedo malfunctioned upon impact, bouncing harmlessly off the hull of the destroyer without detonating, a recurring technical issue that plagued PT boat operations throughout the war. Despite claims from PT crews of potential strikes, Japanese records confirm that all targeted destroyers returned to port unscathed. Nevertheless, these aggressive maneuvers forced the Japanese vessels to jettison a portion of their cargo prematurely, significantly reducing the volume of supplies that reached Guadalcanal's shore. This engagement marked an early demonstration that PT boats could interfere with enemy logistics even without sinking ships. The effectiveness of the October 13th raids prompted Admiral William Halsey to increase PT boat deployments. By November 1942, a dozen boats were operational out of Tulagi, supported by reinforcements and new tactical approaches developed from prior combat experience. Intelligence reports had identified the Tokyo Express schedule. Supply runs occurred every 3 to 5 nights when weather conditions allowed, typically involving 4 to 8 destroyers. The Japanese route was predictable, following a channel around Savo Island and landing at various points along the northern coast of Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Commander Thomas G. Warfield devised a refined tactical strategy from these early encounters. PT boats were to operate in 3 boat sections. One vessel would launch torpedoes, while the other 2 created diversions using gunfire. Given that torpedoes often failed, at least half the time, the accompanying gunfire was intended to force destroyers to maneuver evasively, disrupting supply deliveries even without direct hits. After larger naval battles demonstrated that American cruisers could be outmatched by Japanese destroyers, PT boats became a critical component of the wider interdiction campaign. Though lacking the heavy firepower of destroyers, their persistent harassment compelled Japanese commanders to alter their operational patterns. PT boats routinely patrolled approaches to Cape Esperance, engaging supply destroyers whenever opportunities arose. Despite frequent torpedo failures, the persistent threat led Japanese forces to maintain high speeds, execute continuous zigzag maneuvers, and discard supplies hastily, reducing the efficiency of deliveries to below 20%. During one of the largest supply runs, 11 Japanese destroyers approached Guadalcanal.
PT forces moved to intercept but achieved only limited results. Over 30 torpedoes were fired without confirmed hits, underscoring the recurring reliability issues of their weapons. Nevertheless, the psychological impact was considerable, with Japanese reports acknowledging that enemy motor torpedo boats made operations highly hazardous and required constant evasive action.
One notable exception was PT-59, which successfully sank a Japanese submarine attempting a supply mission, proving that PT boats could be effective against slower, less agile targets. In response, Admiral Tanaka, regarded as Japan's most capable destroyer commander, personally led the subsequent supply operation. His flagship, Teruzuki, a newly commissioned Akizuki-class destroyer, was outfitted with advanced fire control systems and rapid-fire artillery, accompanied by 10 additional destroyers, 6 of which carried supplies in drums. At 2:31:15 hours, PT boats from Squadron 2 located the Japanese formation near Cape Esperance. Anticipating attacks, Tanaka positioned Teruzuki as a rearguard, while supply destroyers moved toward shore. PT-37, under Lieutenant Lester Gamble, PT-40, under Lieutenant John Sears, and PT-48 executed a coordinated attack using tactics refined over 2 months of prior engagements, dividing enemy focus, creating confusion, and exploiting openings whenever possible. These operations highlighted the evolving role of PT boats in undermining Japanese logistics, demonstrating that tactical innovation and relentless pressure could significantly disrupt enemy supply lines, even in the face of superior firepower. At approximately 23:23, one or more U.S. PT boats, reports differ between PT-37, PT-40, or PT-48, launched torpedoes against the Japanese destroyer Teruzuki from a distance of roughly 500 yards. One Mark 8 torpedo struck the vessel near the port quarter, detonating in the steering compartment. The blast caused severe damage to the rudder and propeller shaft, limiting the ship's speed to around 12 knots. Fuel oil escaping from ruptured tanks ignited, creating a blazing trail that made the destroyer visible from miles across the water. Admiral Tanaka sustained injuries in the explosion and had to temporarily relinquish command for medical treatment. The destroyer Naganami maneuvered alongside to evacuate the admiral and other wounded personnel. The evacuation took nearly half an hour, during which the Japanese formation became disorganized and chaotic. Some accompanying supply destroyers prematurely discarded their fuel and supply drums amid the confusion. By 04:40 on December 12, the fires aboard Teruzuki triggered her own depth charges, causing catastrophic internal explosions that effectively broke the ship's keel. The destroyer ultimately sank in waters approximately 800 feet deep. This loss represented the largest confirmed sinking of a Japanese warship by PT boats in the Pacific theater during World War II. The incident marked the apex of PT boat operations against enemy destroyers. Although PT boats would not destroy another Japanese destroyer afterward, their overall impact as a persistent threat was strategically significant. Japanese records later highlighted how these attacks disrupted operational logistics and nighttime supply missions. The coordinated threat of motor torpedo boats, coupled with airstrikes and surface engagements, rendered nocturnal supply runs increasingly hazardous and inefficient. The operational tempo and effectiveness of Japanese supply deliveries declined sharply. Following his recovery, Admiral Tanaka resumed command and observed, "While enemy motor torpedo boats seldom achieve direct hits, the continuous evasive maneuvers they force upon our ships drastically reduce the effectiveness of our supply runs." By January 1943, the Tokyo Express had shifted largely to submarines and barges, which were even less capable of sustaining adequate delivery rates. The combination of PT boat harassment, aerial bombardments, and surface engagements had effectively made destroyer-based logistics unsustainable. The PT boat offensive illustrated a broader evolution in naval warfare. The integration of multiple platforms and weapons systems could offset traditional advantages of larger surface vessels. While individual PT boats rarely sank major warships alone, their role in a combined arms approach contributed meaningfully to operational success. Industrial production data underline the cost-effectiveness of the PT boat program. During the war, the United States produced 531 PT boats. Each vessel required approximately 2 months to construct and cost roughly 1/30th of a destroyer. Even with significant attrition, 69 boats lost from all causes, the PT fleet offered a highly economical means to harass enemy shipping. Training infrastructure at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron Center in Melville, Rhode Island, prepared over 1,000 officers and 10,000 enlisted personnel. Crews were operationally ready after just 8 weeks of intensive instruction. By mid-1943, PT boats were increasingly equipped with SO radar systems capable of detecting targets up to 15 miles away. The late 1943 introduction of the improved Mark 13 torpedo further enhanced their effectiveness by significantly increasing reliability. These technological advancements transformed PT boats into more capable combatants, although their primary mission, disrupting enemy supply lines and smaller vessels, remained unchanged. The Imperial Navy experimented with a variety of counter-strategies, though most yielded only marginal results. Destroyer escorts were deployed ahead of supply convoys in an attempt to shield them from attack, but this tactic came at the cost of fragmenting their defensive strength. Aerial reconnaissance with float planes was used to drop illumination flares over PT boat operating areas. While this helped locate the small craft, it simultaneously exposed the destroyer's own positions. Efforts to switch supply missions to submarines also fell short. Submarines were severely limited in capacity, able to transport roughly 20 tons of cargo per mission, whereas destroyers could deliver close to 200 tons. With garrisons requiring approximately 400 tons daily, the logistical shortfall was insurmountable. In response to the persistent PT boat threat, the Japanese developed armored coastal barges for supply runs. These slower, heavily protected vessels quickly became primary targets for PT boat attacks starting in 1943. It was in this domain, interdicting smaller transport ships, that PT boats achieved their most consistent operational successes, significantly disrupting enemy supply chains even without engaging major warships. Service aboard PT boats attracted volunteers eager for frontline action. The average recruit was only 22 years old, and many had little to no prior maritime experience. They underwent intensive preparation that combined classroom instruction in navigation and mechanics with the harsh realities of sea duty. Living conditions were austere. There were no onboard toilets, meals were cold and minimal, sleeping quarters were non-existent, and most crew members had to sleep on deck when possible. Tropical illnesses afflicted around 80% of the personnel. During combat, all hands were fully exposed, contributing to extreme psychological and physical strain. Casualty rates for PT boat crews reached 33%, the highest across any U.S. naval service during the war. Despite the dangers, morale remained remarkably strong. PT boat sailors understood that they were part of an elite group taking extraordinary personal risks. They forged intense bonds that cut across rank, fostering cohesion and mutual trust essential for survival and operational effectiveness. The story of Lieutenant John F. Kennedy and PT-109 exemplifies both the peril and heroism of service on these small craft. On the night of August 2, 1943, PT-109 collided with the Japanese destroyer Amagiri during a chaotic night engagement. The collision was accidental, a consequence of darkness and limited visibility rather than deliberate action. Kennedy's leadership in ensuring the survival of his crew became legendary. He personally towed a wounded sailor through open water for hours until they reached safety. 11 of the 13 crew members survived the ordeal.
While PT boats rarely sank major enemy warships, their operational value extended far beyond the tally of vessels destroyed. They sank one destroyer, one submarine, and numerous supply barges, but their greatest impact was in persistent harassment of enemy logistics. The PT boat campaign demonstrated the potential of asymmetric naval warfare, showing how small, fast vessels could impose disproportionate disruption on a larger, more conventional naval force. The lessons learned reshaped naval strategy and highlighted the importance of agility, innovation, and audacity in maritime operations. Post-war evaluations identified the principal impact of PT boats as their ability to compel Japanese forces into progressively less efficient supply strategies. The shift from using destroyers to submarines and finally to barges highlighted a tactical approach that achieved success not through direct engagement, but by gradually eroding the enemy's logistical capacity. In essence, PT boats acted as a force multiplier against the Japanese supply chain, imposing a cumulative burden that hindered operational effectiveness. The conceptual legacy of PT boats can be seen in modern fast attack craft. These small, high-speed vessels leverage agility and the element of surprise to challenge larger adversaries. While contemporary designs replaced torpedoes with guided missiles, the underlying doctrine, rapid, unexpected strikes against superior forces, remains a direct descendant of the PT boat philosophy.
During operations around the Guadalcanal area, 77-foot wooden PT boats demonstrated that coordinated naval actions could offset conventional superiority. While the boats alone were insufficient to halt the Tokyo Express supply runs, their integration with air support, submarines, and surface combatants created a network of attritional pressure that proved strategically decisive. The Japanese Navy, confident in its mastery of nighttime engagements, had not anticipated that U.S. forces would deploy multiple overlapping systems. Individually vulnerable, these systems collectively produced effects that were both persistent and disruptive. Commander Chihara, who experienced several encounters with PT boats, later observed that these craft rarely struck directly, yet they consistently disrupted operations, forcing constant vigilance and tactical adaptation. This sentiment underscores the broader lesson. Modern warfare demands flexible responses to unconventional threats, and small, agile units can have outsized effects when effectively integrated into a larger campaign. From a material standpoint, the PT boat campaign's impact was modest but significant. One destroyer, Teruzuki, was confirmed sunk, along with one submarine, I-3. Numerous supply missions were interrupted, and thousands of tons of materiel were lost due to rushed jettisoning. The aggregated effect of these disruptions played a measurable role in the eventual Japanese defeat at Guadalcanal. In Iron Bottom Sound, where countless vessels rest beneath the waves, the Teruzuki lies at roughly 800 feet, representing the only major Japanese warship definitively destroyed by PT boats. Its discovery in 2024 stands as a testament to the effectiveness of small wooden vessels operating against steel warships, demonstrating that courage, persistence, and tactical ingenuity can influence outcomes at the strategic level even when battlefield success appears limited. Ultimately, PT boats illustrated that future naval conflicts would necessitate integrated operations, rapid technological adaptation, and acknowledgement that even minor combatants, when employed within a coordinated strategy, could significantly contribute to overarching victory. Their legacy persists in the doctrine of small, versatile, and networked naval units, highlighting the enduring relevance of innovation and adaptability in maritime warfare.